Greetings, everyone in Luqman Nation. How are you doing? It is I, Jacquie Luqman, and you are watching People's Power Lunch with the People's Prophetess, Jacquie Luqman. Thanks so much for joining me today, y'all. I see you all are making your way into the cafeteria, into the dark cafeteria. The lighting in this studio is so bad. Um, it's just so iffy depending on what room you're in. But yeah, welcome to People's Power Lunch with Jacquie Luqman. Come on into the cafeteria, get your lunch, check out what's on the menu. Hope you see something that you like. Um, Bring your lunch bags, pull up a chair, find a nice place to sit, and let's get to it. So, before we do get started, of course, as always, I want to implore you to support Black Power Media. If you are watching on Black Power Media, you can subscribe to Black Power Media on YouTube, which you might be watching through right now. Click on the notification bell so you can get notified whenever anyone on this channel goes live, whenever we upload any content, so you don't miss everything that we have offering for so many people. There's a little bit of something for everyone. And you can also support Black Power Media on Patreon, patreon.com/Black Power Media. And it's almost July, so it is almost time for another patrons only stream for patrons of Luqman Nation. You can support Luqman Nation on Patreon at patreon.com/Luqman Nation, LuqMannation. Patrons receive a patrons only stream each month, in addition to some neat merch, stickers, coffee mugs, working on t-shirts. So please consider supporting Patreon, Luqman Nation on Patreon. And I see that more of you all have come into the cafeteria. Let me say, hey, Toby, Alex, Leah Boggs, Tay C, My Written Voice, Ricky Ryan, Craig Bardo, Skeptical Mantis Channel 10, Pamela Jones, Manny Nile, Goddess Crew, Kelvin Hopkins, Courtney. What's going on, everybody? Thank you for joining me this afternoon. And of course, the news is circulating all around the testimony yesterday in the January 6th hearing, the House Select Committee, in their latest hearing on the January 6th insurrection. Once again, I was not expected to be interested at all in anything that happened, especially since they kind of did this one at the last minute. This hearing was not actually scheduled for yesterday. They moved this up or threw this into the schedule because of the testimony that was presented. And okay, it was something. So if you did not watch, this person testified. Her name is let me go. Her name is Cassidy Hutchinson, and she was an aide to Mark Meadows under the Trump administration. And the thing she testified to, of course, we again, I keep saying this, these are things we knew in the way that we suspected them to be true, but to have them confirmed, and the depth of the confirmation, I think a lot of people were not expecting. So I think the biggest thing for me that she testified to was the fact that there were weapons brought to the rally. Oops, you got a big old whatchamacall. Sorry about that. There were weapons brought to the rally, and I just wanted you to see her picture. There were weapons brought to the rally. We knew that, right? But What we didn't know, at least what I didn't know, maybe I wasn't paying attention, was that everyone on Trump's team knew that there were weapons brought to the rally because everybody's weapons was getting confiscated as they were coming into the rally because um, the police had set up metal detectors at the entrance to the rally. So Cassidy Hutchinson testified that Trump supporters had knives, spears, flagpoles that were confiscated as they were coming in. This is the stuff that was confiscated: bear spray, body armor, shields, and even guns. And that's what was confiscated before the riot began. So people were heavily armed. But the thing that she said, which I think was very important, was that um, the police were identifying, and they actually played the audio transcripts of the police identifying people in the crowd who were armed. Like there is audio, and you're gonna have to listen to it, where the police are on their scanner or whatever, identifying like three men walking down the street in fatigues carrying AR-15 at 14th and Independence, or white male, stock of an AR-15, green fatigues, Glock style pistols in their waistband. Elevated threat in the trees, y'all. There was somebody in the trees with a rifle. Elevated threat in the trees. American flag face mask, weapon on the right side hip, in the trees. So this was um, this was information that was revealed in the hearing yesterday, that not only the flag poles that you saw that were out there with all the Trump flags, that if you have done any kind of organizing, mobilizing in Washington, D.C., you know damn well that you cannot bring metal poles to a protest, because they will confiscate it, claiming that it could be used as a weapon and lock you up. Them's the rules, right? So we veteran movement folks know that we don't put our flags on metal, or our flags or our banners or our signs on metal poles, because we don't want the police disrupting our stuff. We don't want the police confiscating our stuff. So we make sure that we don't use metal poles for our banners and signs and whatnot. When we have them on sticks, we make sure that we collect them. We don't just let people keep them, and those sticks are not don't have pointed edges, so they could be construed that they're being used as a weapon. We know this. These folks came to DC armed with all kinds of weapons. And the interesting thing, and exactly, Monty, I knew that there were some people armed, obviously, because when you're watching the footage, of the insurrection, on the attempted insurrection, the riot, that was shown on the news, you're seeing all these flagpoles and people using flagpoles as weapons, and you're like, how do they even get that in there? Because we can't. But it was way more extensive than it was. Like everybody was out there with some kind of weapon. But the interesting thing about the testimony was that everybody on the Trump team knew it, because people were getting their weapons confiscated before the rally. So people were telling Trump about these folks and the weapons that were being confiscated. And he was like, I don't even care about that. I'm mad that the ellipse isn't full of people. He was mad that he did not have a massive audience. People on his team were trying to tell him, well, the reason people are not coming onto the ellipse is because they know that the metal detectors are going to alert to the fact that they have weapons, and they're going to have their weapons confiscated, so they're not coming on to the ellipse. And what was Trump's response? According to Cassidy Hutchinson, she heard Trump say, I don't fucking care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the fucking mags away. The mags are the metal detectors. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here. Y'all. Trump's own acolytes were telling him that these people are armed. This is dangerous. And the reason they're not coming onto the ellipse is because they know they're armed and they don't want their weapons taken away. And Trump's response was, I don't give a fuck if they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the metal detectors away. Stop confiscating these people's weapons and let these angry armed people march onto the Capitol. Yeah, that was interesting. Then the other part that I thought was kind of interesting was how they talked about the plan for Trump to go to the Capitol. First, he said he was going to walk, and then when they were like, "No, you're not," as it was clear that this was a problem, then his team was like, "Nope, bad idea." So then he's like, "Well, fine. The Secret Service will take me in the presidential limousine." But he gets in the presidential limousine and the Secret Service does not take him to the Capitol. They take him back to the West Wing. And according to Cassidy Hutchinson, that this is secondhand testimony. This is that she said that she heard someone else say this is what happened in the presidential limousine. She herself did not witness this, but it is funny that she heard someone say that Trump was so pissed off that the Secret Service was clearly not taking him to the Capitol that he reached over the front seat to grab the steering wheel. And when he did that, the driver, who was a Secret Service agent, grabbed his hand and said, "Mr. President, we are not going to the Capitol. We are going back to the ellipse. Please stop." And then with his free hand, Trump then reaches for the dude's throat. Now, again, she is recalling what she heard someone say of the incident. To be fair, Fox News has said that 2 Secret Service agents, one of whom they allege was the actual driver, are willing to testify that that did not happen. So who knows? But I mean, just consider the optics here. Just consider the optics of pudgy little short, tiny hands Trump trying to, trying to wrest control of the presidential limousine, which is called the Beast, by the way. It is just hilarious. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it's an interesting story. It sure was funny. And I think for me, hold on, let me go back because here's a good comment. Yeah, so Ricky says you are offering a different framing from how I heard it before, that he was trying to join the crowd, not that he was trying to get optics of the crowd. It was both. He wanted to join the crowd. Because he said, "I'll be with you." He wanted to join them, but he was also angry that the ellipse was not full of people because he's a narcissistic megalomaniac who likes attention, and he wanted definitely to have all of he was upset that all of his supporters were not on the mall. And then when everybody was on the ellipse, and then when they did take the metal detectors down and stop confiscating people's weapons and let everybody onto the ellipse, then he was mad that there weren't more people. And then Hutchinson testified that his members of his team had to tell him, "Well, Mr. President, everybody who is coming has already come through, so there's nobody else." So it was both. He wanted to go with them, but he also wanted to get the optics of a full ellipse full of people in support of him. So yeah. Um, and I think what I've seen people do is um, focus, have this inordinate focus on Trump. First of all of this has an inordinate focus on Trump, but I think that people have been focusing on the limousine, his alleged actions in the limousine, and what Hutchinson said about him having a temper tantrum um, back at the West Wing, where he threw his lunch against the wall and she, cleaned up after him and wiping ketchup off the wall and all this kind of stuff. I mean, those are entertaining tidbits. Visually, they're funny, but they're not the issue. They're not the issue. Um, Carl L. asked, so the driver individually decided not to take him, or was the driver ordered not to take him? Now, this is something that's a good question, Carl. And this is something we don't know because Hutchinson, again, when she talked about the limousine ride, she was recounting what she heard someone say about what happened in the limousine ride. So she, from what I recall, she didn't indicate that the Secret Service was ordered by anybody not to take him to the to the Capitol. This does not mean that they were not ordered to take him to the Capitol. That's just something she doesn't know, and it's something that they didn't reveal in the. So, but that is a good question, and I wouldn't know how to um, answer it. I feel like for the Secret Service, if it was a decision by the Secret Service to not take him to the Capitol, it was one of, I guess, security, and they're like, "This is ridiculous. We're not." No. Um, and I think that if they were ordered to do that, it would be along those lines also, because remember, at the time when the rally ended, the violence was happening, the rioting was going on at the Capitol. So then that's the other part of this. I think that was really interesting because what Hutchinson did see and hear herself, she was a witness to, was the conversations between White House counsel Pat Cipollone and Mark Meadows after they talked with Trump about the chants that were rising up among the people to hang Mike Pence and the escalating rioting and violence at the Capitol. So she said that she remembered Cipollone saying to Mark Meadows, "We need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be fucking hung." Meadows said, "You heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong." I'm sorry. This is just funny to me that people put all their everything into this man and he's like, "Hang him. I don't care." Yeah. Cipollone said to Mark Meadows, "This is fucking crazy. We need to be doing something more. Mark, something needs to be done or people are going to die and the blood's going to be on your fucking hands. This is getting out of control." But here's the thing though, y'all. It wasn't getting out of control. It wasn't out of control. This was exactly what was planned, right? This is what the plan was. And I think I have to put all of this, everything that's come out in these hearings and whatever is going to come out in the upcoming hearings, because there are more. I think I have to put this in the context of what we're dealing with here. Trump supporters, as misguided and ill-informed as they were, really believed that the 2020 election was stolen. They really believed that democracy had failed them. They really believed that their rights as citizens were criminally denied, that they were, ballots were stolen, illegal ballots were counted, and their legal votes were invalidated by Biden and the Democrats and those two black women in Atlanta. And they really believed that they had no other choice but to take by force what they believed was stolen from them. Well, here's the thing, y'all. And this is really the sticky part of this, that I have to remind myself not to get into, defending this system that these people were attacking for the wrong reasons now, for the wrong reasons. But their basic argument that the system failed them, isn't democratic, doesn't exist to work on behalf of the people. Well, I mean, that's true. So like I am not, while I would love for the Democrats to uh put this much scrutiny on law enforcement to expose what they have not done. That's okay, because the Republicans are going to do that when they win in 2024. When the Republicans win Congress in 2020, in the midterm elections this year, that's going to happen. The Democrats will lose Congress. And then when they win the White House in 2024, then the Republicans are going to have their own little hearing, and they're going to expose law enforcement and the failures of law enforcement. But it's only going to be done in response to what they believe is, the unfair democratic spectacle that these hearings are. And to a certain degree, they are right. This is a democratic political spectacle, because I still am not convinced, regardless of all of the revelations that have come out, that's look to me like criminality. I still don't believe that the Justice Department is going to hold any of these people accountable. If it happens, color me shocked. But but the fact of the matter is, regardless of what kind of hearings are held, and whether anybody is held responsible for any of this, whether Trump is indicted or whatever, the fact remains that Trump supporters finally caught up to the reality of this system that we have known forever, since forever. Like, this was not the first time an election was, the validity of an election was called into question, right? Because remember Gore v. Bush and the hanging Chads and the Supreme Court case that decided an election on, but that was theft. That was, come on now. Democracy, they believe that democracy had failed them. Well, democracy has never existed in this country. This country is not a democracy. It's not. It's run by oligarchs. It always has been. And it elevates private property rights above individual people's rights. And these folks were fine with that order as long as the targets were us, right? Yeah, they believe their rights as citizens were criminally denied. Well, our rights as citizens have always been denied. Honestly, I believe if we ever really were citizens, we wouldn't have gone through the hell that we've gone through, and we still wouldn't be going through the fight to protect our voting rights. How are you a citizen in a country with a constitution that is supposed to ensure the right to vote for all citizens, but in 2022 you are still having to fight for the right to unrestricted access to the ballot box? We're not citizens in this country. That's clearer. The only difference between them and what we have always known about this system is that they did it for a lie, right? And I mean, it's like, it is very, and I think this is where really good political education and really good intellectual discipline has to come in. It's very easy to look at these hearings and hear the revelations and be, oh my God, they're finally going to get Trump. It's very easy because it's a lot. It like, yo, how did they not indict him? How did they not charge that man and all of his accomplices with seditious conspiracy back then? How are the congressmen, the GOP congressmen who were involved in this, how they still got their jobs? It's very easy to get caught up in that when you are listening to these revelations come out. But keeping the eye on the ball, this is a Again, this is a very long campaign ad for the Democratic Party. These January 6th hearings. I doubt very seriously any kind of criminal charges are going to come out of them um, involving Trump. If I'm wrong, I'll be happy to admit that I'm wrong. But again, that's not the point. The point is not Trump and taking down Trump. The point, the underlying point, and I think the foundation of this entire issue is that at its core, at its foundation, those folks who rioted on the Capitol raised the issues that every other group of people who have protested and have been brutally repressed for protesting about this government over and over again. In a way, I don't want to say they've proved our point, but it's like you clearly understand the idea of this system not working for all of us, but it's still a very problematic right-wing white supremacist reason for wanting to destroy the system, because it doesn't work for you for your right-wing white supremacist reasons. Their response to a valid concern, a valid issue with the system, was not in defense of, making this system, what do you call it, equal and just for everyone. No, it was their response to this system was to uphold white supremacist and capitalist hegemony in this country. So I think we have to be very clear and very careful that we don't get on the go after Trump bandwagon and find ourselves caping for a system that we all know needs to die and is dying, by the way. We need not help put this system and keep it on life support, because there are signals around the world that this system is clearly in decline, gasping for its last breath. And not just around the world. I think the first place we see this, the evidence of this, is in a decision that was made by the Department of Defense just recently. I think the Army, actually. And let me see. Well, you're right, Emma. I'm not saying that they stood for what we stood for. I'm saying exactly that. They believed in a lie and they acted on it. But their basic premise was that the system is unfair, that democracy doesn't exist in this country, that the system has failed them and doesn't exist to serve the people. Yeah, there are reasons for coming to that conclusion, absolute bullshit lies. But their basic premise, haven't we been saying those things all along for absolutely valid reasons? Definitely. So, but again, so we see the U.S. government and the U.S. empire struggling to maintain hegemony, to maintain its power. This empire is gasping for air to survive. And we see it with the Army, which has now dropped the requirement for high school diplomas amid a recruiting crisis. I know sometimes it feels like we anti-imperialists are throwing our pearls before swine, like we are just talking to the wind and nobody's listening to us. But I think we're getting through to some folks, because the U.S. Army now is tossing its mandate for potential recruits to have a high school diploma or a GED certificate to enlist in the service. This is huge for the Army. This goes into effect October 1. Recruits have to be at least 18 years old and otherwise qualify for a job in the active duty Army. And they also must score at least a 50 on the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, or ASVAB. Um, the article states that a 50 on the test is a relatively low score. 31 is the minimum to qualify for service. This is why this is important. Combat arms jobs like infantrymen and cavalry scouts only need minimal scores to serve, while admin work like human resources specialist or public affairs requires a score of 100 or higher. So the Army is eliminating the requirement to have a high school diploma or equivalent, and is saying that you don't even need to have you don't even need to be intelligent, because all we need is for you to be able to carry, point a weapon, and shoot at who we tell you to. Why are they doing this? Because the Army and its sister services have scrambled this year, offering increasingly generous benefits and policy tweaks in an effort to improve recruiting numbers. The Army has hit 40% of its recruiting goals this year, just 40%, with the struggle to fill the ranks seemingly so grim. The Defense Department reduced its planned total force size because prior recruiting goals were out of reach. Those challenges come amid a low unemployment rate and a competitive civilian job market, with employers that are not the military offering increased wages and benefits for entry-level jobs. Folks, this is huge. And I think this is, I'm going to drop this in the chat for you. I think this is an indication, one, that those of us who are doing this anti-imperialist, anti-war, anti-militarism work here domestically, we're doing our job. I think we are educating a whole new generation of folks on the danger to humanity around the world that the U.S. military is. And I think more people have seen and are seeing the death trap for what the military is. But also, as they point out at the end of the article, if we continue to push for a federal minimum wage that reflects a living wage, if we continue to push for unionization in the workplace, if we continue to push for better benefits for people, then poverty ceases to become a reason that people join the military. So I think this is good news. It absolutely reflects the desperation of the empire, how desperate the military industrial complex is to prop itself up. But I also think this signals, this is how I'm choosing to look at it, this signals that we, in fact, are winning. We have not won. The military is not abolished. We got a lot of work to do, and we certainly are still under capitalism and austerity. We've got to absolutely deal with that. We have to continue to push for socialism, for all of that. Because once we do that, then again, for people to enlist in the military because they're poor and they can only get health care and housing and retirement benefits from the military, once we push this society and provide that for all people, then why would people need to go into the military? Yes, so obviously the U.S. Army is seeing that, the Department of Defense is seeing that, and they're doing everything they can to avoid that reality from coming true. So that's I thought that was really good from the Army. But internationally, there's some really good and interesting international news also that I thought was very interesting in regard to the desperation that the U.S. empire is showing. And one of those issues involves China and U.S. continued aggression toward China and their continued lies about forced labor and genocide and concentration camps in Xinjiang. This is an article from Global Times. It says U.S. in a futile rehearsal to decouple China with Xinjiang forced labor law. Now, this law that they are talking about is called the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act that went into effect yesterday, and was signed into law by Biden last year. And it is focused on condemning forced labor of Uyghurs in the Xinjiang region. But what it really is going to do is create forced unemployment among the very group of people that the law claims to protect. How are they going to do that? Because this law bans products made in China's Xinjiang region, which is really messed up because the Xinjiang region is a major exporter of cotton. And China in general is a major exporter of lots and lots of things that the rest of the world needs. And for people who are unclear about what is really going on in China in regard to the Xinjiang region, there is no genocide, there are no concentration camps, none of that is true. It is all a lie. The Chinese government has created opportunities for employments for residents of all ethnic groups in the Xinjiang region, and helped them promote vocational school skills, provided jobs, just really made an effort to combat the fundamentalism that was growing, that was leading to problems of terrorism that China was experiencing. So rather than throw people in a Guantanamo Bay-like prison like the US does, China said, okay, we're going to make sure that these people in this remote, pretty much region, share in the prosperity of the nation. So what is this law going to do? This law sets up this a requirement for companies in Xinjiang to prove with clear and convincing evidence that imports from the region are not made by forced labor. The thing is that no imports from the region are made by forced labor. None of them, nothing is. But what this does is cause more companies to have to conduct reviews and comply with the law, which would be difficult. And the more complicated and globalized the supply chain is that a company is involved in, the more it costs the company to comply. So what will happen with this law is that the U.S. will impose these restrictions on companies that do business with countries that do business with companies in Xinjiang. And when those companies in Xinjiang, according to the U.S., do not prove that their products were made with forced labor, because this law is based on nothing but whole cloth. There is no evidence of any forced labor, anything, anywhere in Xinjiang or anywhere in China. But when the U.S. inevitably comes back and says these companies have not complied with this law, then you know what's going to happen? Those companies are going to lose business because they won't be allowed to trade with other countries because the US said so. Those companies in Xinjiang will shut down, and guess who will be unemployed? The Uyghur Muslims that the US claims they're trying to support. So the US is literally doing in China what they have done in other countries, but by funding like opposition groups to rise up against the government. The US, under the Biden administration, is using the Uyghur Muslims to create manufactured unemployment and create a situation where they are so angry and disgruntled and disenfranchised that they will rise up against the Chinese government. The Chinese government that actually improved their lives to the point that when China had the one child policy, Uyghur Muslims were exempt from that policy. The Chinese government has allowed Uyghur Muslims to worship as they choose. There are mosques all over China. As a matter of fact, the life expectancy of Uyghur Muslims over the past 20 or 30 years has doubled because of China's improvements in the region. And their population has grown because, again, they were not subjected to China's one-child policy. So now, now the US government is going to destroy the gains that China has provided for the Uyghur people in order to use the Uyghur people as a fifth column in China to rise up against the Chinese government. And I just really feel like the Uyghur people understand which government improved their lives and which government will be responsible for them being disenfranchised again. I don't think that's going to work out the way the US government under the Biden administration in particular thinks it will. But it will be interesting to see how it works out. And oh, I forgot, I'm sorry. Let me give you a link to this article also so you can read it for yourself. And let me see with what y'all had to say. Mm. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is an interesting comment. For many people are able to go to school loan free and own homes because of the military. Use the system. Don't let the system use you. The job of the US military is to kill people around the world, impose capitalism and imperialist hegemony in countries at the point of a gun that don't want it, leaving a trail of blood centuries long around this globe. We should not be buying a house and going to school for free off of the deaths of working class and poor and oppressed people around the world who have been slaughtered by US militarism. There is no trade-off for us that is worth the amount of blood that's on the hands of the US military. And I think we need to be very, very clear about that. And I think that is what people are catching on to. That in order to get that health care, that house, and that education, you have to be down with subduing people-focused movements around the world, people who are struggling for their own self-determination and freedom in their country and don't want the US involved. So the United States sends the military in there to kill those people and subdue them so the US can come in and do what it wants in opposition to the will of the people. And you also have to be completely okay with the exploitation of people who look like us, of women, of children around the world, and with the US military being the greatest polluter of the planet, basically killing us all, contributing to climate change. If a free house and free college tuition is worth that, do you? But that's not what we anti-imperialists believe. The reason we advocate for socialism is so that everybody in society can have access to those things. And you do not have to join the military and sign a contract that says you are going to go kill people for this empire in order to get those things. That's why we fight for socialism. Come on, Emma. Didn't we? Ask those people in Libya how they feel about us and our college degrees and our houses that U.S. military members have earned for their service. Ask our brothers and sisters in Somalia how they feel about ask about that. All right. So the other thing I wanted to talk about real quickly is BRICS. We thank you, Ricky. This I always have to remember that when we talk about U.S. imperialism, there ain't no we. This government is not us. This government does not represent us. We ain't got nothing to do with their actions. No. This is why we divorce ourselves from their actions and we don't support them. This is why we fight for a better world. So the other thing I want to talk about is BRICS. And the BRICS conference was held last week. There's so much going on. It is hard to keep up with everything. Good grief. So this is published in People's Dispatch. Fantastic publication. And they talk about the BRICS Summit. And again, this relates to China, but also countries involved in the BRICS Summit. And I really feel like everything that's going on in the world and domestically signals that we are at the inflection point. We as in humanity are at the inflection point. We are in the midst of the birthing pains of a multipolar world. The polar world order is dying, and the multipolar world is being born. And I think that's absolutely reflected in the BRICS Summit that was held on June 23rd. Member countries denounced hegemonic practices and called for the establishment of a true multilateral and democratic world order with increased participation of emerging and developing countries in global economic decision making. And these are all of the folks who were in attendance at the conference. There's a link to the joint declaration that was issued at the end of the conference here, which you can find in the article. But at the end of the conference, they talked about broadening and strengthening the participation of emerging markets and developing countries in the international decision-making and norm-setting process. And that is not how things are done right now around the world. Because as I said, the United States decides what developing nations will or will not do in regard to their international participation, and certainly economics, right? Because if an emerging nation decides that, or developing nation decides, if those people decide that they want socialism as the economic model for their government, the United States government will send in the CIA, the NSA, the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, to overthrow the leader that the people are about to elect or have elected who advocates for that to ensure that that doesn't happen. Because the United States always wants to insert people who will allow the US government and US and Western corporations to go into developing nations and exploit their resources and their people for capitalism. That is what happens now. And when developing nations don't like it, when they resist, like I said a few minutes ago, the US sends in the military. At the BRICS Summit, the leaders involved were opposed to this. They want a world that does not include this. President Xi Jinping talked, he threw major shade at the US because of this. He warned against some countries trying to dominate the world and forcing others to follow their diktats by using their primary position in the international financial monetary system, the SWIFT system and the IMF Bank. He denounced the unilateral use of unilateral sanctions to politicize the global economy and turn it into one's tool or weapon by countries like the US. And he said that moves like this will end up hurting one's own interests as well as those of others and inflict suffering on everyone. And I think this leads to I think one of the most important outcomes of the BRICS conference, and that is the expansion of the Shanghai bank-based New Development Bank that just opened its branch in India. The bank will provide easy loans to developing countries under the contingent reserve arrangement. BRICS members agreed to strengthen alternatives to the SWIFT banking system to end the hegemony of the West. And y'all, the era of U.S. capitalist and Western capitalist IMF Bretton Woods hegemony is basically over, because the rest of the countries of the world have already begun using an alternate finance system than apart from SWIFT, and that was sped up as a result of the US, the EU, and NATO's proxy war in Ukraine. So now that the Russian ruble is actually doing really well, despite all the sanctions that the US continues to try to or continue to impose on Russia and Russian businesses and individuals. The reason that's happening is because Russia is still able to do business with other countries because they are not doing business through the SWIFT system. Major global partners in oil and other goods that Russia provides the rest of the world are happily paying for those goods in rubles, and they're bypassing the US, EU, European dominated SWIFT system. And now they're the new, what is the name of this bank? I'm sorry. The New Development Bank will offer loans to developing countries. This means that developing countries don't have to go hat in hand to the IMF with their austerity policies that are also tied to US imperialism and neoliberalism. Because as soon as one of these countries who has an IMF loan does something like, I don't know, elect a leader who is more inclined to socialism, then the IMF decides they want to accelerate the loan and they impose austerity measures on the country to pay it back, plunging the country back into poverty. Now with the New Development Bank, countries don't have to deal with the IMF. This is a big deal. This is a huge, huge deal. And then you have countries also more and more countries signing on to declaring regions of the world zones of peace, like the CELAC zone of peace. This is a huge deal. We are watching in real time with our very eyes a new world being born. And as we watch it, as we see these developments um, continue to advance, we have to be careful that we continue to keep a close eye on the US and Europe and imperialism, because they're not going to go away without a fight. Um, Zelensky today is begging, literally begging, to be given membership in NATO. I believe Finland and Sweden have been extended their applications, or I think there's been some movement in the positive direction in regard to their bids to become members of NATO. That only means more US and NATO troops and weapons, including nuclear missiles, to be deployed in those countries, to be pointed at Russia and China. Excuse me. So we are absolutely on the precipice of a new multipolar world being born, where we can realize entire regions being declared zones of peace, where militarism and people-centered human rights are, where militarism is eradicated and people-centered human rights are elevated. And from those regions, people-centered human rights can be realized through struggle around the world. But at the same time, we are also on the precipice of an incredibly dangerous moment in the history of militarism in this world, because we are that much closer to a nuclear conflagration, because the empire does not want to go quietly and will not. So, a lot of good news, a lot of interesting news, but as always, news that we have to keep in mind, reminds us that we have to continue to struggle. We have to continue to struggle for a better world. It's coming, it's emerging, it's being born, and it's being born out of struggle, by the way. For all of the seeming inaction that we see so many millions of people being happy with here in the United States, with everything going on here, in other places in the world, people ain't taking this austerity and this neoliberalism and this imperialism. People ain't taking this shit sitting down. As you see people pouring into the streets at the G7 summit, at the NATO summit, there were massive protests that were not televised. No coverage whatsoever of the tens of thousands of people who were out in the streets at these summits. But people are aware that the empire, the capitalist order, US backed capitalist hegemony is dying. And they are pushing, they are fighting for a better world. Our question is, what are we going to do? What are we prepared to build on the ashes of this empire when it falls? So, thanks so much for joining me on today's People's Power Lunch. Thanks, Nia Shell. I hope it was important information. It sure was fascinating to talk about it today on the show. Let me go up. Craig Botter says IMF, World Bank trade deals, then austerity, elimination of social programs, and if that fails, coups, assassination. That is U.S. foreign policy. Absolutely. Yes, y'all support the CELAC zone of peace. As a matter of fact, let me look it up so I can drop it in the chat for you. so you can read it, so you can understand what it is. And know what it is we are supporting and why. It's incredibly, incredibly important. All right, friends, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for hanging out with me at lunch today. I hope that lunch was nutritious. I hope you're full. I hope that you come back Friday. And just to let you know, Imprint of Imperialism will be back first Friday each month. So this Friday, 7 p.m. on Black Power Media, will be season 2 of Imprint of Imperialism. So thanks a lot, y'all. Be really good to each other, be good to yourselves, and as always, a luta continua. The struggle continues, but Victoria acerta, victory is certain. Peace, folks.